Hello, Laura. I'm just checking in. We're going to get started in a few minutes.
Wonderful.
Well, what do you think? It would be better if it was. I would say that would be good. Yeah. That's okay. You know, it's okay. So, Laura, do we have John on Zoom?
We do indeed.
Say that again. Yes?
Yes.
John is
John?
ready? Okay.
Yep.
He is
Do a
here.
sound check for John.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can. We cannot see you, but we can hear you.
And John, will you have your video on?
I will not.
Okay. That's okay. I have a screen,
Slide.
a slide. Thank you. I have a slide for you.
Yep.
So when he has a slideshow. John, you have a slideshow?
No, he has a slide.
A slide. It's just kind of walking
Okay,
through the process.
We're going to just want to see you too, if that works.
Okay. Give me 1 second.
Good to see you. How are you? Good to see you. Well, good evening, everyone. It's around 7:03. We're going to wait about another minute or two to get started because there are people parking and coming in. While we're waiting for a minute, I just want to welcome everyone. This is St. Mark's Episcopal Church. And just a word about the art around you. This is created by one of our members. Her name is Carolyn Favor. And it's called The Birthing of Spirit is what she calls this collection. And so we're blessed to have this art with us, and so you know where it comes from. And the piece of art above the altar is actually from a show we had back in 2013. It was created by an artist who lives in Sweden. She actually grew up in the Soviet Union, and it's called Your Face I Am Seeking. And it was such a wonderful part of that exhibit that it was then purchased and donated to St. Mark. So that's what that piece of art is. But anyway, make yourself at home. If anybody needs a washroom, there are a couple options through this door here that I'm pointing to at the exit sign. If you go down in the hallway just to your right, there are washrooms there. There's also a drinking fountain. And back in the entryway narthex, if you go down the stairs to your right, are bathrooms as well. So again, we'll get started in just a minute or so. All right, it's been a minute, so we are going to get started. Welcome. My name is George Smith, and I serve as the rector of St. Mark's. The word rector might be equivalent to other churches where you have a pastor or a senior rabbi or something like that. It probably comes from the word director. But behind me stands, or with me, a big community of people, and one of our core virtue or values at St. Mark's is to invite the community for many different things. And so a town hall makes perfect sense for us. A town hall goes back to the colonial era when communities would gather around important issues. And tonight's issue, gun safety, is a very, very important one. And so I'm grateful that some of our civic leaders, elected and others, are here tonight to share information with us about guns and gun safety. And then as part of a town meeting, there's an opportunity for questions and answers. So for those in person, we're asking you to fill out a note card that are available in the entryway narthex, and you put your question there and your email. And part of this is so that if we don't get to your question, you will get a response from somebody, because they will answer you after this town hall. For those who are with us on Zoom, isn't that great that we can have such a 21st century miracle? For those on Zoom, you can also put your questions in the chat, and we will try to record those and answer those as well as we are able. This meeting is also, town hall is also being streamed and recorded to YouTube, where it could be watched again. And so if you wanted to share it with somebody else after this is over, you can just send them the link. And you will find that on the St. Mark's YouTube channel, and we'll make sure that's available as well. So we have a lineup of presenters for us, and we're going to start with John Earnest. He's from the Illinois State Police, and he is with us actually on Zoom. So we're going to see how this works. And John, are you ready?
I am.
Okay, so Laura, if you could show his slide there we go.
Hi, so my name is John Earnest. I am one of the assistant bureau chiefs for the Illinois State Police Firearms Services Bureau. I oversee the FOID and CCL and eligibility programs, as well as the application processing units. What I'm going to be speaking about today is kind of walking you through how you get a FOID card, which will allow you or allow individuals to purchase firearms, and the background checks and system that we have in place to make sure that those who are eligible for those firearm rights do receive a card, and those that are prohibited individuals are properly determined to be prohibited. So right now, if you wanted to obtain a FOID card, you would go to the state police website at ispfsb.com, or you have the option to call into our call center, and you can talk to one of the nice people in our call center, and they will get the process started for a paper application to get you a FOID card. So a FOID card, it costs $10, $1 for every year that it's valid. And once the payment is received by the treasurer's office, your application is received, and then it is placed immediately into a holding pattern. In that time period, your name and date of birth is checked against the records from the Illinois Department of Human Services for any individual that has received mental health treatment. And we send this file over to DHS every night. They review the matches and then send the matches back to our analysts, and those matches are reviewed to make the determination whether that is actually our person, our applicant. If they find that to be the case, the application is then denied at that point without proceeding any further than that. If the applicant does not have a mental health hit, they proceed on to our quality control verification process. So in that, we make sure that everything that was submitted with the application is valid and complete. We check the address that was submitted, if that matches against the records on file from the Secretary of State. We don't want to send a FOID card to someone that's not going to receive it, and we assume that you're going to keep your driver's license or state ID up to date. We check for the correct name to make sure that our background checks are accurate for the individual and any other previous names that may be associated with an individual. We review a submitted photo. Unfortunately, a lot of applicants wonder why the photo that you submitted is not what goes on to your FOID license. We use whatever is submitted to the Secretary of State's office, because that's our validation, and that is the governmental photo that's already on file. So we match all of that information, and if there is any sort of issue, the application is not denied, it's what's rejected. So that gives the applicant the opportunity to go back into their application and correct whatever issue was identified by our staff, and allows them to just resubmit the application. And then it will again be quality control verified and determined whether that the application is now complete. So once the application has been quality control verified, it proceeds on to eligibility. Now, eligibility is where all of the background checks happen. So a single individual will be matched against, I believe it's 11 or 13 systems, starting with our Illinois criminal hot files, which includes the Illinois criminal history, as well as our officer cautions and a series of other files related to orders of protection and the firearm protection order. This information is also sent to the federal government for their National Crime Information Center and the Interstate Identification Index. The Interstate Identification Index has criminal history from all 50 states, including our territories and the military. That is then also proceeds on to the FBI for their NICS system, which is the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. Any individual that is federally prohibited is entered by the states into the NICS indices. In Illinois, we are called what's called a point of contact state. So all background checks for NICS are run through the Illinois State Police. There's 13 POCs. The majority of other states run only through the FBI. So we've added those additional layers by checking our Illinois criminal history records as well as the DHS holds. So at that point, we will also check the immigration status as part of our background check system. Individuals that are not citizens are able to obtain a FOID card if they are legally residing as a permanent resident in the United States, which is the majority of aliens that we receive with FOID cards. It is also checked against NLITS, which is the National Law Enforcement Telecommunications System. This is for any out-of-state identifiers that may be present. So after an analyst runs all of those background checks, they will review what's called our the criminal history record in Illinois, which is tied to the Illinois SID, which is the state identification number. Any out-of-state SIDs and the FBI number, which kind of ties everything together. It would have the combination of both the Illinois criminal history and the out-of-state criminal history. The analyst at that point makes the determination as to whether there is a prohibitor present. If there is a prohibitor, they will deny the application at that point, and the individual will be notified of whatever prohibitor was identified by the analyst. If there is not a prohibitor, it will proceed on to printing, and we will issue the card and mail it out to our applicant. Now, if at any point from the active history, so your card is valid for 10 years. So once that card is issued, that doesn't mean we stop reviewing criminal histories or ensuring that our applicant pool remains eligible. We have a series of other systems. One of those being correlation. And our correlation system is where any individual that is fingerprinted upon arrest, their information is sent to the Bureau of Identification in Joliet, and their system also runs against ours and sends us a notice when an individual has had an event that caused an update to their Illinois criminal history. Our staff review those updates to the criminal history and make a determination whether a prohibitor is now present. And if it is identified that a card that was active needs to be revoked, we will take action at that point. So once
had a low battery notice, but we're good.
Okay.
I think. I hope your battery is charged.
I am plugged in and charged, so I should be
okay.
good.
10-4.
So if we identify an active FOID card holder needs to be revoked because we've identified a new prohibitor that arose either through our correlation or maybe we found a mental health hit after the card was issued, or a order of protection was issued against an individual or firearm protection order, we will take action and revoke the card. When we revoke the individual's FOID card, they will receive a letter from our office, again, identifying what prohibitor was identified. At this point, we've done a series of updates since the, I guess it's the Fix the FOID Act was passed, to kind of modernize our system. So a series of emails will be sent to an applicant notifying them of what has occurred. Letters are also sent and emails are sent to the local law enforcement and sheriff's office of the individual, as well as our state police investigative zone. Upon receipt of notice, an individual whose FOID card is revoked has 48 hours to turn in their FOID card to local law enforcement and submit a firearm disposition record, which is a record of where their firearms are being placed, since they are no longer eligible to possess them as a result of the revocation. So that is that. I know there was questions regarding, or at least I was told to be prepared for any questions regarding our backlogs that we experienced kind of during the pandemic. With that, just kind of would like to speak on where we are and where we've been. 2020 was a massive year for all applications that were received by the Firearm Services Bureau. We received a record 484,460 applications in 2020, which was the record year all time, followed by the second highest record in 2021 at 428,850. With all these applications, we had to hire a substantial number of staff. We brought in and trained 33 firearm eligibility analysts to help us tackle the backlog. At its height within the Bureau, for new FOID applications as of October 2020, we stood at 142,889. For renewals, for 141,998. The issue is hiring 33 analysts is great, but it takes about 6 months to train them up to where they can process FOID cards at a reasonably quick speed while also maintaining a high degree of accuracy. So we were fortunately able to get there. Right now. Our current wait and processing time is 15 days is the average processing time of a new FOID application, 18 days for a FOID renewal application. Then for concealed carry licenses, it is for a new concealed carry where an individual did not submit fingerprints, it's 117 days, so still within our 120-day mandate. If you submit with fingerprints, it's 86 days. For CCL renewals, which I know we had a backlog that we had to spike through, it is 102 days for applications submitted without fingerprints and 72 days for those submitted with. And I know that we have some questions. I've heard from public about, put in my application, it's now showing that it was printed, and there is some information as to working through the postal system to get cards out to individuals. And we did want to highlight that we have created a e-card as part of the modernization of the FOID Act. So an individual today can go onto the state police website, go into their FOID dashboard, so under ispfsb.com, log in with their credentials, and then on the side tab, there is something that says My eCard, and they can pull up and display their current FOID card or combination FOID concealed carry card. And we've been very excited about that. That was something that we put into effect in early May. So.
Well, John, thank you. We really appreciate that overview. And there are people who not know what FOID is. That's the firearm owner's ID. All right. So does everybody know what that is? Okay. But that's what we were talking about. So the way questions are going to work, if people have questions about what John just said, you can fill out the note card and submit it in the entryway. Because now I'd like to invite Cordelia Coppelson, who's from the Attorney General's office, to offer some comments and information for us. So Cordelia.
Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody virtually. My name is Cordelia Coppelson. I'm an Assistant Attorney General. I'm the Law Enforcement and Prosecutor Coordinator and Trainer for the Illinois Attorney. I'm going to get closer and shorter. That's the story of my life. I am the Law Enforcement Prosecutor Training Coordinator for the entire state of Illinois. I train on firearm restraining orders for all 102 counties. I also train on sexual assault, trauma-informed, and victim-centered response to sexual assault investigation, and elderly service officer training, which we have incorporated our firearms restraining order into that as well. I have slides, so without further ado, I will get to my slides. And you'll also have my information, and any questions that you have, you can reach out to me directly and ask any questions that you have. If you don't think about them tonight, then feel free, if they come to you the next day or down the road, I'm happy to answer the questions if I know the answer. I'm going to tell you I'm going to know most of your answers today, I'm going to hope, but I might not know all of them at this time. So again, very happy to, I will phone a friend, I will look it up, I will figure it out, but I will get you the information you're looking for. So we can start with the next slide. So really what we're talking about is, I'm going to talk about firearms restraining orders, right? So what are firearm restraining orders? The law was passed in the summer of 2018 to allow for people to use firearms restraining orders to prevent firearm violence in their homes and communities. It provides family and household members and law enforcement to be proactive in addressing their concerns by providing them a civil measure. So let's remember, and that's really one of the things I want us to be thinking about when we talk about firearm restraining orders, is we're not talking about criminalizing the behavior necessarily. There may be situations in which the behavior is criminal, but we're talking about situations that if we do this, we're really trying to keep people safe and keep this as a civil measure to remove those firearms without involving the criminal justice system. So we want to make sure that we're doing this to prevent people who are exhibiting dangerous behaviors from legally accessing firearms, ammunitions, or parts that can be used to make a firearm. So that would include ghost guns, or there's been a lot of conversation around the 3D printers and how we are making guns in other ways now. So any of those things. Again, it allows the family member or household member and law enforcement to work with the courts to temporarily remove guns and also prevent the purchase of guns. For individuals who pose a significant risk of harm to themselves or others. Again, it is a civil procedure, not criminal, and the goal is to ensure the safety of the individual and everybody around them. So what is it going to do? How is it going to keep people safe? It requires that temporary removal of guns from the subject of the order, and again, prohibits the new purchase during the duration. We're hoping it will create safer circumstances for that individual to seek treatment, to stabilize behavior, to access resources, to address the underlying causes of those dangerous behaviors. In Illinois, there are two types of firearm restraining orders. There is our emergency restraining order, which will last for 14 days. And then there is a longer plenary order that lasts for 6 months. And that can actually be renewed after that if there's additional hearings. Because we're always going to be talking, when we talk about a constitutional right, like something involving the Second Amendment, we are going to be talking about due process, and we are going to be talking about fairness to everybody as we discuss whether or not that person should be entitled to ownership or possession of their firearms at that time. It's important to understand that we have a gun problem throughout the state of Illinois. By county, it's important to think about it. I know here we're in DuPage County, and DuPage County actually has one of the lowest gun death rates in Illinois, but it's interesting to see how these things do vary throughout the state. We also want to be thinking about, when we talk about firearm restraining orders and we talk about gun deaths, we're not always going to be talking about homicide. We also are really going to be thinking about issues of suicide. If you look at the chart that I have in front of you, and I know some of you are in the way back, but that royal blue color is suicide. The light blue color is homicide, and that dark blue color at the top is other. This is something that I don't think that a lot of people consider, is that the majority of the times we're going to be talking about these kinds of cases, we're going to be talking about suicide. And I want us to be really aware, and I think in my slides that we're going to be talking about the academic research concerning looking at the firearm restraining order as its impact on reducing suicide rates in our communities, which is really a very exciting, very positive move forward if we can think about using this civil measure to help people in their darkest hours. So what does it look like when we talk about firearm restraining orders? That's what Illinois calls it. It can also be called an extreme risk protection order. It can also be called a red flag law. Other states use them as well. And since the Parkland shooting, February 15th of 2018, 10 states have approved bills similar to the Illinois Firearms Restraining Order, bringing the total number of states with firearm seizure laws to 21, with the District of Columbia, and many other states are also considering it. Which is again very important. Some of them are different. Some of them are different from Illinois. The general understanding is that they generally are very similar, but they each have kind of their own ideas. Some states only allow law enforcement to seek. Other states like Illinois allow family members as well as law enforcement to seek. Some other states involve mental health professionals or school administrators as well. It just depends on where you are. But this is the academic research that I was talking about. Just to understand where we're talking, they were looking at Connecticut and Indiana. Connecticut and Indiana have had firearm restraining orders or firearm seizure laws on the books for the longest period of time, so they're easier to study in terms of their long-lasting impact. This 2017 Duke study looked at the results of Connecticut's firearm seizure laws, which have actually been on the books since 1999. And on average, law enforcement removed 7 guns for each order. It's interesting because I teach with constituents and I teach with law enforcement. Law enforcement's not very surprised by that number, and usually my constituents are a little bit more concerned. So we really do want to understand that there are a lot of guns out there in households. So, and I think this is an interesting fact as well. 1 in 3 subjects were given access to mental health care and alcohol drug misuse counseling, often for the first time, right? Some of these people, law enforcement is coming across through community caretaking, through complaints from neighbors, and it may be the first time they're getting eyes on these people, right? These people have been law-abiding, responsible gun owners, and now because of whatever might be happening in their lives, they are in desperate need of intervention, right? So that's where we're talking about the importance of what we're dealing with. And for every 10 to 20 orders, at least 1 suicide was prevented, which really is a very profound thing to be thinking about. And what they did in Connecticut is, if you remember the Virginia Tech shooting of 2007, Connecticut realized that they had this law on the books since 1999, and they really hadn't been using it the way that they had hoped they would. And after 2007, they pushed out education, and they were very forward thinking about figuring out different ways to use it. And they saw an increase of about 5-fold to about 100 cases per year, which is what I'm hoping in Illinois. We are at that precipice with our law, and we are going to see this law be used the way that it should for our population in the state of Illinois. And again, we want to remember that when we're looking at this, and this is another study, it's my last study, I won't shove all of it down your throats today, but there's a 2018 American Psychiatric Study that looked again at Indiana and Connecticut, and Indiana's firearm seizure law was associated with a 7.5% reduction in suicide in the 10 years following its enactment, which is actually a very profound statistic when we're talking about lowering these death rates. And again, with Connecticut started with a 1.6% reduction in its suicide rates, but after Virginia Tech, after that 2007, they saw almost a 14% reduction in their suicide rates, which is really very important as well to be thinking about. And we really want to understand that there is that reduced population level of firearm suicide rates. So even if we looked at it just through the lens of suicide reduction or suicide prevention, this is an incredibly powerful piece of legislation. So what are the types of FROs available in Illinois? Because I want you all to know that if you have a family member or a household member that are in crisis, you can go directly and petition the courts yourself for this help. You can petition the courts to ask for these guns to be removed. You can petition the courts to speak to the judge to let them know what is happening in your households. If you know other people who may be in those very difficult situations. I know as a rector here in this church, you see people who are in crisis. These are the kind of things that we want you to know, that you are able to go yourselves as family and household members to do something if you need it. If you are not comfortable because you don't know how your family member is going to respond. If you're concerned, you can always take those concerns to law enforcement directly, and law enforcement can then petition on your behalf to have this done. So I just want you to know that as we start, I want you to be forward thinking about understanding that you can share this information with anybody and let them know that they can feel a little less desperate and a little less stuck in a lot of these situations. So we're going to have two types of firearm restraining orders. Sorry, I'm not very good for my person who's trying to guess what I'm going to say next, but she's doing an excellent job. There are two types of firearm restraining orders. We have an emergency firearm restraining order, and like I said, that longer or that plenary firearm restraining order. I'm ready. Now, again, who can apply? So it's always going to be law enforcement or a family member of the respondent. That includes spouse, former spouse, person with whom the respondent has a minor child in common, parent, child, stepchild of the respondent, any other person related by blood or present marriage to the respondent, or a person who shares a household or common dwelling with the respondent. So that's going to be a roommate, can also be somebody who comes forward to let the judge know that they are asking for this relief. The emergency FRO is the type of order available again to family members, law enforcement, that can be obtained even with the oral approval of a judge. So when we're talking about these kinds of orders, these orders are considered ex parte. All ex parte means is that it's not going to involve the respondent. And when we're working in civil court, we're always going to be talking petitioner and respondent. The family member, household member, or the police officer will be the petitioner, the person asking for the guns to be removed, and the respondent will be that person we are asking to have the guns removed from. Okay, just as I go through these slides so we can keep track. So all we're talking about with that emergency order is it needs to be dealt with immediately. As we know, with issues with firearms, these things can be very impulsive, they can be very quick turnaround, and answers need to be given and decisions need to be made quickly. With that said, it will be an ex parte order, which means that it will be the petitioner coming to the judge and letting them know immediately what the problem is. The respondent in this matter will not be noticed up for this hearing. And it's going to be, again, on the same day that it was filed. The petitioner will describe what the concerning behavior is, and the petitioner will also describe if the respondent is in possession of firearms, what kind of firearms they are, where are they specifically, are they at the respondent's house? Can you tell us more specifically where they are in the respondent's house? Are they next to the bed? Are they in a safe? Are they at the front door? Where can we find those firearms? And then if the judge finds probable cause to believe that the respondent poses an immediate and present danger of causing personal injury to themselves or another person by having access to firearm, ammunition, and firearm parts that could be assembled to make an operable firearm, the judge will issue that emergency order. So that will be the standard that the judge is always thinking about. The judge will be looking at the statutory list. This is the list that is in the law. But as I tell all of the law enforcement when we train, this is not an exhaustive list. This is the list that the judges will consider, but any other concerning behavior that's not included in this list should be included in any orders that the idea that I always tell law enforcement, whatever their spidey senses are firing when they're leaving something that they feel very uncomfortable in, but it hasn't risen to criminal behavior, tell the judge. And that goes for family members and law enforcement and household members as well. But this is the list we're going to be jumping up from. So it's reckless firearm behaviors, history of threatened, attempted, or actual physical force against another person, a prior arrest for a felony offense, a history of violation of protective order, records demonstrating abuse of alcohol or controlled substance, recent threat or act of violence directed towards themselves or others, a violation of a protective order currently in place or unexpired, and convictions for any crimes that would prohibit possession of firearms under the law. And there's another one that you can't see, just because I think it got cut off a little bit, which would be, I think it says unsafe firearm behavior. So that is the list. But again, the idea is that all you have to do is tell the judge what's happening. Please let the judge know anything if it includes that list or it's something outside that list. If the order is granted, The respondent will refrain from having in their custody, control, purchasing, or receiving firearms, ammunition, or firearm parts during the duration of the order. The emergency order only lasts for 14 days. It is that emergency moment of saying, we will not be affording the respondent an opportunity to speak, but it will only be for 14 days. And the respondent can turn over to local law enforcement, their FOID, or their CCL, which is their conceal and carry. So that's the firearm owner identification cards. It's basically either of your licenses to have that gun. If the court issues an emergency firearm restraining order, it shall, upon finding of probable cause that the respondent possesses firearms, issue a search warrant directing law enforcement to seize the firearms, right? That means that person no longer has the ability to have those guns. Now, in the addition, the judge can also make the determination that that this case warrants a search warrant of the person's house. Okay, we've already talked about the fact that we have a constitutional right in the Second Amendment, right? But we also want to be aware that this is going to be a constitutional right under the Fourth Amendment, that we are free of search and seizure, right? So this is something that we have to be aware of as well in terms of, if we are going to infringe on this constitutional right, is this person afforded due process? What is the standard? And the standard, again, is that the judge is going to direct it if they have probable cause to believe that person is in possession of those firearms, and those firearms can be found at the respondent's residence or another location. Let's say that the respondent has a storage space, or the respondent keeps their firearms in their workplace. The judge can direct law enforcement to search. But there is going to have to be a showing that they have reasonable articulable suspicion to believe that that person has those guns, right? Who's seen them? How do we know they're there? What kind of guns are they? We work with gun worksheets a lot of the time too, because, you know, depending on your understanding of guns or your experience with guns, you could be like, no, it's, you know, this kind of gun, that kind of gun, this kind of, or you could be like, it's black. I don't know what kind of gun it is. It's, I don't know, like, is it a revolver? Is it an automatic? Is it a long rifle? Is it an assault rifle? What kind of magazine does it have? So we have pictures and things like that that law enforcement can use to help people, family members, et cetera, say, well, it looked like that kind of gun. So it gives law enforcement a better idea of what they're talking about. Are they talking about a search warrant to recover 60 guns and 75,000 rounds of ammunition? And I wish I was joking about these numbers, but I had a police officer approach me at a training, and he was just around the middle of the state, and he said they went and they did a firearm restraining order, and they said the guns were fine. We took about, he said we took about 70 guns. He said, but our problem was when we started counting the ammunition. We couldn't count it because there was so much of it. So he said, we just decided to weigh it. And it came in at about 6 tons of ammunition, right? So that's 2 old-fashioned cars. I don't know if cars weigh as much as they used to do, but 3,500 pounds is about the weight of, you know, a car that had a little bit more steel than it does in it now. So it's really something to think about. And that's very important in terms of officer safety, in terms of respondent and family member safety, as much information as law enforcement can have to understand how that search warrant should be executed, again, to protect police, to protect the people living in that house, and to protect the respondent. So we're going to understand that there are 2 different ways to do that. Our 6-month firearm restraining order is going to be the one that affords our respondent a little bit more due process, right? Our respondent is going to be noticed up after the guns, if he has he or she, they have the firearm restraining order in place. They're going to be given that opportunity to come to court and tell the judge their position on the firearm restraining order. This is not an ex parte order, and it's going to be scheduled within that 14 days. They do have the ability to apply directly for a 6-month order. I haven't seen that many, and I've been since to pretty much mid 2019, I've been talking to as many police officers who have used the law as we've seen. It's hard to think about situations that aren't emergency But in a 6-month applying directly, it could be that somebody is younger and they're not old enough to buy guns, but they're thinking about doing it for their 21st birthday. Maybe that's a purchasing question. We also always want to remember that firearm restraining orders prevent purchase, right? Which is something, they don't have to have an FOID card to have us be able to get a firearm restraining order. They don't have to be old enough, right? There are a lot of different situations in which if they have access to guns in the household, that firearm restraining orders can be used in that time of crisis, and those guns can be returned to whoever who might have owned them legally after the judge has a conversation with everybody about what's happening in that household. So that's always something to be thinking about. For those 6-month orders, the petitioner must file the affidavit or verified pleading that the respondent poses a significant danger to themselves or others in the near future, right? So the emergency order is right now, and that plenary order, that 6-month order, is going to be in the near future. Has there been any change from the 14 days? I don't know how many situations in which we find that there's an emergency, that we are desperately needing to go in front of a judge, and you get those 14 days that it wouldn't be appropriate to ask for the 6 months. I don't know how many people in crisis can find themselves resolved in 2 weeks, right? So we are constantly going to be looking at giving us that wider berth of recovery, that wider berth of stabilization in asking for those 6-month orders. And again, the petitioner will be describing if there are additional guns or if they're guns from the get-go, that this is a new order. Next. Thank you. Remember, again, this is going to afford the respondent that due process. The court may review the same testimony, that same list that I gave you about concerning firearm behaviors, but the respondent is allowed to bring an attorney. The respondent's allowed to speak to the judge directly, and the respondent's allowed to bring witnesses, just like the petitioner is allowed to bring witnesses, bring, we always tell them what's social media, or do you have social media issues? We had a case in which the police officer, the family members were concerned because the man was writing goodbye letters to all of his family members. So they accumulated all of the emails and brought those emails directly to the judge for the judge to see that this person was seriously contemplating suicide, and they were able to get that firearm restraining order. So if the order is granted, is issued for those 6 months, we can pick up from those 6 months afterwards. There are other things that the Illinois State Police will also be able to do in that interim as well. There's something called clear and present danger that they would also be filing most likely, which is a direct appeal to the Illinois State Police to say, we don't think this person maybe should have an FOID card or a CCL card, and Illinois State Police can also make that move to revoke that FOID card or CCL card, and that respondent still has that due process for appeal and review at that point as well. So we just want to make sure that then we always know that the FRO can't be renewed after it expires. Okay. We always want to think about burdens of proof, right? When we talk about these things, there are different things that we talk about when we talk about due process. I had an opportunity to go on to just to do more research, learn more, and to understand positions. I went onto the NRA's website to find out what their position was on these red flag laws. And the fact of the matter is they say clearly they are not, as long as there are certain things in place. And they're looking for these certain things. This burden of proof, for example, this is a clear and convincing burden of proof that the contention is highly probable. It is actually a slightly higher burden of proof than we usually have in civil cases. Again, there are other due process things that are in effect in our law here in Illinois that protect that respondent and their Second Amendment rights. But we also are always thinking long-term about that person's safety and the safety of those people around them and the safety of our community. So we always want to remember that we are going to see that burden shift here and there. Either it's going to be a preponderance when it's something that the respondent wants, and it's usually clear and convincing when it's something that the petitioner wants. So that's just something to think about. And the 6-month firearm restraining order is going to be the same thing. You can't have guns, you can't purchase guns, and you have to give up the guns that you have. Dispossession is a real ongoing conversation that we're having. Dispossession is, you say you can't have guns, how do we know that you've given up your guns, right? That's something that really is an important aspect of communication, of getting the right, we're working on an implementation commission from the governor, and we're working really hard on understanding how we make sure that these things are seen through to the end. If you're not allowed to have guns, how quickly are we going and making sure those guns aren't there anymore? So that's something else to think about, and how they give up their FOID cards, how they give up their CCL cards. When these firearm restraining orders are entered, they're also entered into something called leads. If I can tell you what leads, it's law enforcement something. Law enforcement advisory database, and that's not it, but it's something like that. And I wish I knew it right off the top of my head. But really what it is every time a police officer runs your information on a traffic stop, they will get the information that firearm restraining order is in place and it is active. It means they have the right to take an FOID card or a CCL. It also gives them that opportunity to understand that this person may be in possession of firearms and may be a danger to themselves or others, to give them that ability to be a little bit safer in that traffic stop, to ensure the safety of themselves and that person they may be stopping. And again, this is the same thing, that the court shall issue that search warrant to say that they can seize the respondent's firearms, and that they may, if they have probable cause to believe and they want to do it, they can ask for a search warrant for the residence of the respondent or where the respondent may be holding on to those guns. The respondent is afforded a termination hearing if they want one. It was written in consideration that perhaps a person gets quite angry when their guns are taken away, and when they have their firearm restraining order entered on a Monday, they might say on Tuesday, I want my guns back. And they might say on Wednesday, I want my guns back, and so on for that entire 6 months. Obviously, that would be very difficult for law enforcement or family members to come into court each and every time. So the respondent is afforded one termination hearing, and they can bring the information to the judge. It's a preponderance of the evidence, burden of proof, to say that circumstances have changed and that the order should be terminated and they should be legally allowed to possess their guns again. So the judge would make that finding and they would grant that order at that time. We're allowed to ask for a renewal of the order as a petitioner. Law enforcement can ask within the last 3 months of the 6 months that there's been no change of circumstance, this person hasn't sought help, that they are still making those same maybe threats against the individuals or organizations or their employers, whatever the case may be, so they can get another firearm restraining order that would be good for another 6 months. If you violate the firearm restraining order, you are guilty of a Class A misdemeanor. Like we said from the beginning, we are trying to make this a civil process. We are not trying to involve this in criminal behavior, but the respondent is given that opportunity to either do what they were told by the judge or not. And if they choose not to, they can get charged with that violation of the firearm restraining order, but they can also get charged with multiple other offenses at that point because they are no longer legally allowed to own those firearms. So there would be unlawful use of weapons charges that could be filed, and that's a decision that law enforcement and the state's attorney in their area would have to make. Another thing that's very important, this is another issue that the NRA is always looking for in these situations. If you look on their website, what is the expungement and sealing issue? If the judge denies an issuance of a firearm restraining order, all records of the proceedings will be immediately expunged from the record. If the judge grants a firearm restraining order, that information will be held for 3 years following the expiration of the order, and then it will be sealed. So sealing is different. It's not a destroyed document. It is still there, but it is going to be, is not going to be accessed by employers or by other people, and law enforcement will have a limited access to that information as well. I will say the good news of living in DuPage. DuPage has the highest number of firearm restraining orders that have been done in the state, and I think they're really at almost 3/4 of them. I would say from my experience with the With why this is true, I think it has a lot to do with the DuPage County State's Attorney's Office working in conjunction with law enforcement in DuPage County, with the Sheriff's Office, with the Clerk's Office, and with the judiciary. The way this will be successful in its implementation is if everybody is on the same page with how the procedure works, right? The judge will make the final decision of if the order should be entered or not entered, but the real hurdles that we have are making sure that when somebody shows up to file the order, that every single clerk knows that it exists, that the law exists. In DuPage, they have a process. There are a lot of other counties that have never had a firearm restraining order, and our great fear is without more training, and we have trained, my office has trained over 1,000 law enforcement and constituents, and anybody else. I say that I will stand on any corner and talk about this until I'm blue in the face, because I want everybody to understand it. But when I say that, there are counties that don't have that experience. There are rural counties that have other issues that we have to figure out to make sure that we understand what's going on. But generally speaking, we need everyone on board to understand how we get in front of a judge. The judge is going to call those balls and strikes. That's how it's going to work. But I want to make sure that law enforcement understands. I want to make sure that people that work with people in crisis, that means clergy, that means human resources. I always thought, as a prosecutor, I'm a career prosecutor myself, I went domestic and interpersonal violence immediately. And when I started going out and talking to people about these orders, I was fascinated to see that it wasn't just interpersonal violence. It was issues of workplace violence, issues of school violence, public space targeted violence, but it was also issues of dementia, of longtime responsible gun owners who at this point and stage in their lives didn't have what it took to be responsible gun owners. And the idea of removing those guns to ensure that these people went for the rest of their lives being safe and being safe for their communities was something that was really very interesting to me. So that is the end of my presentation. And once we're ready to answer questions, I will be ready to answer any questions that you have, if you put them on the cards, etc. And like I said, if you think of any, or you have other groups that you would like us to speak to, I Zoom, I go places, I'm happy to go anywhere and talk to anyone on this subject. So thank you so much for listening. I appreciate it.
Are these your glasses? Oh, there you go. Don't forget those. So much information. Thank you. Our next speaker is Deb Conroy, who's a state representative, and she's the chair of the Mental Health and Addiction Committee. So would you please come up here? I may be working on this iPad to check on the Wi-Fi setting, but don't let that bother you.
Good evening. I do not have a PowerPoint tonight. I am just here to talk to you a little bit about what the state is doing in terms of kind of reacting to what we're dealing with now in terms of we have generations of people that are affected by shootings, whether they're in the streets of Chicago or whether they're at a parade in Highland Park. So in reaction to that, the speaker has put together a working group. So outside of my Mental Health and Addiction Committee, he has put together a working groups, one on guns, one on mental health. And actually they're also diving into kind of social media and the dark web. I'm not sure exactly what they can do there, but it's an interesting place to start looking. So what we're doing is we're talking about what are we doing for victims of gun violence. You know, I mean, we're talking about lifelong PTSD. We're talking about families, you know, whether it's you're an actual victim, a family member, or a witness. You know, how are we caring for this? Or do we have wraparound services to care for that type of thing? You know, there's a lot of debate out there, whether it's the guns or whether it's the mental health. And we are looking at both. We need more services for mental health. We need more conversations about it. So one of the bills that's been filed, that I actually filed, is called the White Flag Law. And the White Flag Law closes a loophole in the Red Flag Law. And what that does, and it's a lot of work, the bill has been filed and it is in the legislative process. It's currently in the process because these things are very difficult. The Red Flag Law took a very long time. So we're working with the state police, we're working with NAMI and mental health providers to make sure we have the proper language. So what the object of this bill is that when we have minors that have issues, whether it's anger or it's a mental health issue or whatever it might be, where they would be potentially a danger to themselves or to someone else, we need to put this white flag law into effect so that they are not able to get, when they're 18 years old, a FOID card. They're not able to legally acquire guns until they're in a place. We know in the mental health community that our brains are not fully developed until the age of 26 years old. 26 years old. So the access, now we have, it's easy to get guns, and not everybody is a responsible gun owner. And when we talk about suicide, we know that if you are there at the moment that somebody is considering suicide and you can intervene, in that moment, that person likely never goes back to that place. But if their means of taking their own life is with a gun, your chances of saving them are slim to none. There are other ways that people try to do that where they do recover, but if it's a gun, they're not going to recover. So we're currently working on the white flag law. We're working on the gun. I'm not sure what's going on in the gun working group because I'm not in that one, but in the mental health working group, there's so much that we're talking about, from basically from birth on up. We need to start talking about anxiety, depression, isolation. We're looking at how we do the mandated reporting for, say, child abuse. Is that a similar thing that we can put into like a white flag law so that we have people that can identify these issues and we can make sure that we're not only protecting our communities, we're protecting those vulnerable individuals at a time in their life when they need to be cared for, not end up being in a situation where they're out expressing their situations and harming other people. So I think in Illinois, we take very seriously mental health. I think that in DuPage County, we're very, very proud of the fact that our, issues with guns are very, very low. And as was stated before, and is 100% true, DuPage has issued more red flag laws than anywhere else in the state. And a portion of the reason for that is, we have folks in other areas of the state that will say, we don't have the money in our budget to do the training. Well, you know what? As legislators, we need to start saying to them, then you need to figure it out because this is a law and we have to start enforcing it. That's a big issue. And in DuPage, they just put it into their training because they knew that it had to be done, and that's why it happened. So that's kind of why I'm here tonight, is just to talk to you about the fact that we are very involved in trying to find solutions and policy solutions that can end some of this. And when we talk about gun violence and what happened in Highland Park, we also have the shootings that are happening in the streets of Chicago. So, this is not something new. The phenomenon, though, that we have of males, they're males 18 to 22 years old. For some reason, 99% of all of our shooters are males between 18 and 22. There's a lot of things we need to do to try to figure out why that is and what we can do to change that. So this is just a prevention that we can put in to add some support to the red flag law that will affect the last two mass shooters. Neither one of them, if the white flag law had been in effect, would have been able to legally acquire guns. So that's an area that we're trying to cover, and I think we'll get there, but it's hard. It's a lot of work, and we're gonna get it done. So.
I don't know, I think the male brain isn't mature until maybe age 56. That's my own experience. We now have Tara Costa Howard, who represents District 48, and she's going to offer some reflections, and then we'll have some questions and answers. Thank you, Tara.
Well, first I want to thank everybody for being here this evening. I'm Tara Costa Howard. I am the state representative for the 48th District, and welcome to the 48th District. I also would like to thank my friend, my community activist, organizer, and somebody who really understands the needs of our community here from St. Mark's, because when Reverend Smith makes a phone call, we all stop and listen, and I see Pastor Shannon here as well this evening, and when those two gentlemen call my office, we all spring into action to figure out what it is that we can do and how we can help, and we really appreciate that. So tonight's presentation and the goal was about facts. It's about presenting information to our community so that they understand what the law is, how it works. We see a lot of things out there on social media that are scary, and we want to make sure that people are afforded the information that is true and accurate. And many people don't really understand the way the process works. So again, this evening, thank you all for being here and caring enough to have factual information. So next slide. What I want to talk to you about tonight is really the laws that are on the books. Again, we here in Illinois have a great opportunity because we do have strong laws here in Illinois. And so we want to make sure that they're implemented and that people understand them. So first and foremost, in the last 2 years, we have passed significant gun legislation. House Bill 562, which was sponsored by Leader Jay Hoffman, of which I was also a co-sponsor of, that went into effect in August of 2021. That expanded background checks in all gun sales. And that also meant private gun sales and the transfers between individuals. We wanted to make sure as well that we gave our law enforcement another tool in their toolbox by allowing them or requiring them to create a stolen gun database. So oftentimes we hear about guns that are stolen or that they are used in other crimes that they were stolen. And again, this allows our law enforcement the opportunity to create that database so that they can track that information as well. As well as that bill made an investment in mental health in some of our most impacted communities. House Bill 2400, that was a bill that I was a chief co-sponsor and worked with Representative Moore Hirschauer. Many of us as parents, popping my peas, excuse me. Many of us as parents, as educators who I see here this evening, we understand that our children are participating in active shooter drills. In fact, when you talk to kids, they are more alert and in tune with an active shooter drill than a fire drill, than tornadoes drills that many of us had to deal with as children. And I think that that's probably a little alarming for a lot of us, that our kids beginning in preschool and kindergarten understand what it is to do. But the point of this bill is to address the issue of our children that are experiencing, they call it training trauma, meaning that they had live action law enforcement training where kids didn't know that it was a drill. They were under the impression that potentially this was a real thing that was happening to them. And the amount of stress and anxiety that our kids were facing due to that was something that we wanted to address. So we worked with, obviously, our law enforcement, we worked with our school social workers. We wanted to make sure that we were addressing the training piece because we want law enforcement to have training, but also acknowledging that we don't have to have live actors and fake blood in order for our law enforcement to get training and have those children subjected to that. So I'm very proud of the work that we did on that bill. House Bill, again, 1092 deals with the firearms restraining order, and again, requiring our agencies to actually have that training program and awareness. And as Assistant Attorney General Coppelson talked about tonight, that's part of that program. House Bill 4383 was a ban on is the ghost gun bill. It was mentioned earlier. It's amazing to many of us that people can order parts and then have a machine at home and put a gun together. This was happening, or it is happening, I should say. And so what this ghost gun bill does is it requires a serial number. It requires a number to be on these parts so that they're able to be traced if they are found or if they are used in the commission of an offense. Next one, go ahead. So I want to talk about House Bill 4729. Again, this creates a public awareness campaign for gun safety, and really we like to talk about it as safe storage awareness. Again, individuals, we know that they have a constitutional right to have these weapons, but we want them locked up, right? We want them to be done in a safe manner, and good gun owners, they do that, but we have some people who maybe need a little reminder, and we want to make sure that children aren't getting access to these guns, that people who come into your home don't get access to these guns because they're locked in safe storage. And then House Bill 5193 allows our schools to include gun safety in health class, in their safety training in their schools. Again, it's not mandated, but it gives permission to our schools to be able to do that. Now, today, as Representative Conroy mentioned, a working group, and the gun working group is looking at bills that are on file, things that people are talking about, but they're meeting with individuals, they're meeting with organizations, Attorney General's office, our other law enforcement, Sheriff's office, state police. They want to gather information. But many of you have been contacting my office and probably offices across the state regarding an assault weapons ban. And House Bill 5522 that was filed by Representative Hirschauer starts to be that conversation of what that assault weapons ban could look like. Now, I want to be clear about this because I think one of the problems that we often have and why we are here today is about accurate information and starting at a place of mutual understanding of what this means. And that starts with a definition. Again, educators, you know, as you're reading in context, definitions of words are important, but within the context, we have to understand what that means. So the definition of assault weapon we're going to use this evening is what is in House Bill 5522. Now, this is a very long definition, and I hate to read to people off of slides because I don't want to do that to all of you. However, the point is this. House Bill 5522 defines an assault weapon as any rifle that has a belt-fed ammunition system or which has a detachable magazine capable of holding more than 10 rounds of ammunition. 10 rounds, 10 bullets. A semi-automatic rifle that has the ability to accept a detachable magazine and has any of the following: a folding or telescoping stock, or a shroud that is attached to the barrel so that the non-trigger hand doesn't get burned from the kickback or from the heat. It would not get burned. A semi-automatic pistol has the ability to accept a detachable magazine and again has any of the following: the folding or telescoping stock, the shroud to prevent a burn, but it also a manufacturer weight of 50 ounces or more where the pistol is unloaded. So it doesn't even have the bullets in if it's at that weight. A semi-automatic rifle with a fixed magazine that has a capacity to accept more than 10 rounds of ammunition. A semi-automatic shotgun that has, again, a folding and telescoping stock or a shroud, or a fixed magazine capacity in excess of 5 rounds of ammunition except as authorized under wildlife codes and hunting conservation. Again, that hunting piece that is in there that would have it not qualified. Now, again, this definition goes on for pages, and that's just sort of the beginning of what that definition is. And it's a starting point. Different definitions occur in different states. But again, when we think of assault weapons, sorry, I had to put something fun because, or identifiable to many of us, because when we talk about assault weapons, oftentimes this is the vision that comes in our head. These are military weapons, these are mercenary weapons. It's hard to imagine that a weapon like that could be on our streets. But this is what's on our streets. These are the items that are sold in stores. And as I'm looking around the room and I'm watching your eyes and the expressions on your faces, yeah, this is what's out there. These are the same kinds of weapons that our military use in war, in combat. Yes, these people are trained, but these are the types of weapons that at this time are able to be on the streets, in your neighborhoods, near your schools. These pictures are meant to represent, to give people an understanding of what are the things that we're talking about, that these are actual examples of that fit within the definition of an assault weapon. Next slide, I think there's, there we go. Again, I want to make sure people understand what a magazine is, what a clip is. These are multiple rounds of bullets. So when we hear about a mass shooting and the number of bullets that are out there, it's because of these magazines. It's because that shooter has the ability to fire off that many rounds. Again, there's nobody in this room, I can't imagine, we all want to prevent these kinds of tragedies. I have to believe nobody wants to ever have to make a decision about whether to attend a large gathering because of what may or may not happen. But I think it's important, again, for us to talk about these things, about what is our reality, what are the facts, and where we go from here. So again, I'm very proud of the work that we are doing in the General Assembly around this issue. We are examining it. We are always being thoughtful. We are always ready to make changes that are necessary, because the number one thing that people want in their community is to feel safe. Nobody wants to send their child to school, as school is beginning this week and next week. Nobody wants to think that their child isn't going to come home again. These are real conversations that are occurring every day around the nation. But here in Illinois, we have an opportunity to once again be leaders and have thoughtful discussions and make thoughtful changes to keep our areas safe and to be able to make sure that our communities have a solid understanding of what's happening. So again, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. Does anybody have any cards of questions that they might? I'm really fortunate. I also have to give a shout out to my team, to my wonderful interns who are here with me today, Frankie and Riley, my staff, Emma and Joe and Gail and Elizabeth. This has been something that we've been working on for the last several weeks, and my team is dedicated to this issue, but more importantly, they have received and they are making notes of every single email and phone call that we have gotten over the last several weeks on this issue. Some of you have received an immediate response. Some of you are probably maybe still waiting for a response, but this is our responsibility collectively to make sure that we are answering any of your questions and being available to have these conversations. So tonight, thank you once again to our host, but this is about making sure our community has information, and this is because all of you have been calling all of our offices seeking answers. Thank you.
So now we have time to hear some of the questions. And how is your, do you want to read the questions? So why don't you come here, read them, and then we'll find out who's the right person to answer them.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I work with Tara, State Representative Costa Howard, to me. And we're doing it this way because we want to get through as many questions as we can. So we've got them boiled down, and we're going to get through them as fast as we respectfully can. So I'm just going to start with one that's at the top of my list here. Is there a world in which a state can mandate a diversion of funds, such as that lobbyists receive from gun manufacturers, to school safety mechanics, i.e. bulletproof doors, etc.? Not quite sure what the. Okay. I come from a family of hunters. Oh, sorry. Sure, the mic is on. I can turn it off.
Yep. Testing. There we go.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Fine. All right. I come from a family of hunters in the mountains of Pennsylvania. None of them would consider hunting with an assault gun or even owning such a weapon. I don't understand why so many gun owners refuse to make this compromise. Is it a slippery slope issue? And I'm not sure who would, I mean, Tara.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, a slippery slope in terms of trying to get, having avid hunters not understand why you would need a weapon of that magnitude?
What they're asking is, if you start, restricting assault weapons, does that mean that eventually will get restricted?
No, no. The Second Amendment does not, again, I'm a lawyer. The constitutionality of the Second Amendment has been decided repeatedly. So I don't see a ban on assault weapons, as suggested in that question, as a slippery slope. If we remember, we did have a federal ban for quite some time, and we didn't have these shootings. So the data is very clear.
Okay, let's see. Thank you. Okay. Yeah. All right. Am I on? Yeah. This is a complicated question. I'm trying to why is it that in Illinois is the fire? I think this is one for the AG's office. Well, why is it that the Illinois firearm restraining order? Why are they not being used more broadly? What can be done about these low numbers issued as compared to other states? And what is being done to make sure the other part of this law related to the proactive ability to keep dangerous people from getting guns in the first place is utilized? And I think you addressed some of those, but you want to extend?
Just to address the specific question asked, I think that obviously training is key. I think that we did get the ball rolling, and then we were doing extensive trainings till March of 2020 when the shelter in place went into effect. It's reaching a very large state, 102 counties. And again, like I said, making sure that each county has a procedure that will be something that can make sure that people can use the law and that the law is effective. And then it's also, as the representative mentioned, closing a lot of those loopholes to make sure that all of the different gun laws work together, work consistently.
I think this one is definitely for Representative Costa Howard. Where does Terrace stand on eliminating AR-15s and similar weapons from public access?
I'm a chief co-sponsor of House Bill 5522. I do believe that we should not allow those assault weapons as defined on our streets.
Oh, hold up, come back here. We got another one for you. Okay, and then would someone please define gun safety?
I know gun safety seems like sort of a big word or a big phrase and all-encompassing in so many ways. Safety means a lot of different things, right? It is a combination of making sure people, in terms of guns, who legally should not have them, don't have them. Hence, we have firearms restraining orders. We have, in terms of a conceal and carry, you have a training that you must do in order to have a conceal and carry license. We want to make sure that people are safe, right? Are our guns locked up? Are our communities making decisions about what they want within their communities? Right now, there are a number of communities who, including Glen Ellen, I believe, who are examining whether or not that they would allow the sale of assault weapons per their definitions in their communities. And again, that's the epitome of local control. And so we want to make sure that whatever we can do to keep our communities safe from weapons, and that's what we're going to do.
As I understand it, our representative from the Illinois State Police is not here? Okay, no, there are a number of questions specifically for law enforcement, so if you ask a question for law enforcement and you're not hearing it, it's because the person who can answer it is not here, but we will be getting back to you individually, and I don't know how else we're going to do it, but we'll have a good way. Okay. So again, for the AG's office, well, I guess this would be law enforcement too. Okay. How are we promoting gun safety training sessions in our county to equip citizens to sensibly store and use guns for protection? And who's offering those trainings? And I guess there's an unasked question here of, would that be something appropriate for the state of Illinois or county officials to do?
Those were some of the laws that I talked about tonight in terms of the public awareness campaign, both within our communities as well as the ability of our schools to do that. We make those investments. Again, we're very fortunate here in DuPage County to have a state's attorney's office that believes in these trainings and wanting to make sure that we actually have information, that our law enforcement, that our attorneys, that our villages, that our citizens have this kind of information. So again, we want to make sure that safe storage, the public awareness campaign succeeds. We put money into it to make sure that happens. Like everything that we do here in Illinois in the state budget, there have to be dollars associated with these programs. And so I know that we did put those items in the budget.
Hi. Okay. Moms Demand Action is a nonpartisan group that does offer the Be Smart program, which specifically addresses gun safety and storage. So if that's something you're interested in, we have a table back there. But really, by people coming to meetings like this and getting involved and asking those questions, that's how we can better get people trained and aware in our community.
Okay. The Chicago Tribune says that Illinois' red flag law is confusing. What can be done to clarify, and is there a trailer bill underway? I mean, you mentioned the white flag. You want to talk about anything else?
So the answer is yes. There's been a lot of work that's been done. The state's attorney has changed some rules. The governor has put in some emergency orders. And the most important thing with this is that we're making sure that we close the loophole. So I think that's probably the most important thing. And I think I've talked to the Tribune, I've talked to NPR and that about this kind of loophole that really directly would have affected what happened in the last 2 mass shootings. So I think that's the most important thing. The other thing we're looking at is the definition of clear and present danger. So we need a better definition around that because it basically empowers our law enforcement. So there were some issues in Highland Park where they said what had happened with this person did not reach the level of what they considered clear and present danger. Well, I think for all of us, we felt it absolutely did. So we're trying to redefine that so that we can empower the police to make sure that these things don't happen again.
Okay. Let's see. There's a preamble, but how can I, as an individual, help push for meaningful gun safety legislation, given the stances of officials and lobbyists in other states? And thank you in advance for your response. I guess with the issue of, I think they're making the point about, our laws in Illinois do not extend to our border states, and that's the issue. Sorry.
Well, I would say that's a lot of the problem that we face. Highland Park actually has a ban on assault weapons, but that didn't prevent this person from acquiring one or bringing it in. And so the reality is that we're kind of an island in Illinois. We do have the strongest gun laws in the 50 states. I do believe that. But unfortunately, all the surrounding states around us do not. And so that's a problem. So a lot of this really needs to be addressed federally. But, you know, we're gonna do the best we can in Illinois to continue to protect our communities.
This is a really interesting question. I'm not quite sure who's the right person. Someone's asking, as a physician, I have an impaired patient with mental illness or dementia, unclear, with guns at home. The patient lives alone with no family. Should we contact law enforcement? And, you know, who I guess has standing to make that call? And so.
I think absolutely. If you question if you're somebody who's been in a situation where you know that somebody could be harmed to themselves or they're not able to really, I mean, that age happens, right? So you can't drive a car anymore when you get to a certain age. They take away your driver's license. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, anytime that you know that you're concerned about somebody who could harm themselves or harm somebody else, I think you have a responsibility to say something. Absolutely. So would they then call? Who do you call? You can, call law enforcement. Call the state's attorney's office, either of the above.
The restraining orders, do they go to a database that all sellers of guns and ammunition must go to before selling? And I guess one question would be, what about sales that are occurring out of state?
So how that works is when the firearm restraining order is issued, it is required that it goes into the LEADS database to let the everybody know that the FOID or the CCL is revoked, which means they would not be able to purchase a gun in Illinois within a revoked FOID or revoked CCL, which would be part of the background check for any of those guns being purchased.
There's a question here that's extremely related. What can we do to provide more security to protect our schools?
Well, here in our community, there are a lot of safety measures that have been put into place. Things like the door. I mean, you see, you have to ring the bell to get into all of our buildings. We have glass. We have several steps before people can get in. But I know I'm going to assume perhaps some of the undertone of some of those questions are often the question of, do we arm our teachers? They don't want to be armed. More guns in our schools are not the answers. We need to be able to keep our kids safe. The incidents have shown that many of these shootings have occurred where there are guns at that building. That is, arming our teachers is not the answer. Making sure that our families are aware of what our safety procedures are, what that looks like in each of our buildings, that's important. District 89 just passed their referendum to increase the safety needs within our schools. So we have to be vigilant. We have to have people that are paying attention. We're going to still do our active shooter drills in our schools. Kids need to know what to do. Our staff needs to know what to do. But again, being vigilant, asking questions, being aware wherever we are. And if you're unsure, 911.
Sorry, there's also a conversation that is being had about behavioral threat assessment teams in schools. One of the things that we realize is because these shootings are so fast, the response time for law enforcement is very difficult. So we are really trying to figure out and focus, how do we identify the children or the kids in these schools that may be in crisis? How do we identify them ahead of time and give them the services that they need to avoid the incident that would occur at the school? We see that if we get information out, the Safe to Tell or Safe to Help program is an online program that the kids can have on their phones where they can make confidential. It's really just, it's that same concept that Department of Homeland Security has. We want people to see something, say something. The majority of these shootings, there is information known to other people, be it parents, or other kids in the school, where if law enforcement or school administrators had that information, it would be extremely helpful. It's also trying to make sure that we help those children that are in crisis as well ahead of time. It's always trying to be proactive instead of reactive in these situations.
It costs over $100 to get a substitute teacher's license. Why is a gun license only $1 a year? It presumably it costs substantially more than that to process a gun license. Would it be appropriate to have them pay more per FOID card rather than have taxpayers provide basically a subsidy for the card?
So I think that's a conversation that's had, and there's a lot of back and forth about it often. I've had people approach me and say, you know, we need to put in a tax on guns or on ammunition that will go directly to mental health, and have even gone so far as to say that will go for mental health in schools. And then we talk about telehealth in schools so that we can access more mental health services and social work support for our kids. So those conversations are out there, and you know, there's two sides to it, but I think there's some strong conversation going on about that.
What resources are available for kids who are experiencing trauma from active shooter drills? Getting our steps in here.
From active shooter, so from active shoot, you mean the trainings in the schools? I think that's, I don't know that there is anything specific for that. I think there's also two sides to that conversation as well. I think that we have to be, you know, social workers, we need more social workers in our schools. We need more teachers to be aware of the level of anxiety and stress that our kids are under, particularly with these active shooter drills. I know there's a debate about the active shooter drills cause more stress and trauma to the kids but you know what? When your child is in that situation, they need to have that. Unfortunately, that's a part of, you know, I had some very good friends who had kids that were at the Oak Brook shooting, and their kids were calling from hiding in a store and saying, "Don't worry, Mom, we're fine. We know what to do." So it's just a part. I mean, I guess we're getting less and less sensitized by it because it's happening so often. But sadly, just like being prepared for tornado drills before we built our buildings, you know, strong enough to hold them, we have to make sure that our kids are safe. So I think that we need more social workers, we need more teachers that are out there saying, you know, I can see that this child is really struggling from this active shooter drill, and we need to step in and we need to provide support.
There's a lot of questions on here. I'm trying to boil them down a little bit. Well, I guess one question, which I think you probably addressed, but if you want to expand, how well do FROs really work? And how often do they fail? How often do people who have, I assume the question is, who are the subjects of FROs, how often do they somehow get their hands on firearms, and how often after the guns are returned, is there a tragedy?
So one of the problems with the FRO is that a lot of the times we're not going to know what we've avoided, right? We're not necessarily, we don't have any black and white of saying, we saved the day, this didn't happen, right? We are really basically understanding the permanency of firearm violence and the quickness of firearm violence, or of the fact that we know that people who attempt suicide by firearm are the most successful at it because of the ability and the understanding of, again, the permanency of firearms. So that's one thing we're going to have to understand, and we're going to have to keep moving forward. We don't have enough data in Illinois right now to give you answers of saying it worked perfectly here, it didn't work perfectly there. Again, because we're dealing with people who we're never going to get a yes, no answer from in terms of what happened. We're hoping to have more information. We do know that in other states, Florida, for example, counties that are very active, we're seeing a lot of these cases go through. Florida had, I want to say, 2,500 or over 2,500 of them in a 1-year period of time. So we really are wanting to see our numbers look a little bit more like that, only because the more information we have, the more information we'll be able to gather and get to see how successful we're being.
Okay, I've been told that we have time for one more question, and there are a bunch of really good questions, and I'm sorry we can't get to it. Can everybody hear me? There are a bunch of questions, and we'll be taking them and coming up with some answers, right? So I guess, you've talked about what's currently being done, the laws that are currently being considered. What more can we do as a legislature, as a community, to improve gun safety beyond what we've already discussed tonight?
Being here is step one. Taking the time to educate yourself about what the law is, what we're working on. Those are the most important things that we can do here. We have groups like Moms Demand Action. Again, if you are want to be involved, we have groups like that want people to be educated about gun safety. You can attend a village board meeting. I believe that our village here in Glen Ellen is investigating and discussing a potential assault weapons ban. But most importantly, keep on your elected officials. Keep calling. Keep emailing, and not just us who we represent, those of us who represent these communities. Keep calling your congresspeople. Keep calling your legislators and elected officials in other counties, because we don't really, the borders are the borders, but the reality is we are one state, we are one community, we are one nation. And so we want people to understand what's going on. We want people to have information. Don't stop. Don't stop calling. Don't stop telling us you care. Don't become desensitized to what is going on out there. Be aware. We want you to be aware. Elizabeth mentioned, this was sort of our last question, not because we don't have tons, but in the interest of time and out of respect for all of you, we will be answering these questions. If you've given us your contact information, we will respond to you. My office is very good at that. Give us a second to gather our data. We want you to have factual information. This is important to all of us. So thank you.
So one of the questions was, there have been people on Zoom putting questions in chat, and I don't know if some of those came through in the cards, but if they didn't, they will be responded to. And because we have a record of those, and if you have your email or attached to them, then there will be a response. I guess just one comment again is when we started our town hall, I said, this goes back to the colonial era, that communities gather, and it's such an important part of the democratic process of a civil society. And I'm just grateful that this has been a good meeting. There have been good questions. Thank you to those who have presented, to John, who had to go, but that worked, and that was a great presentation as well. So I'm grateful to all of you. I'd like to give you another round of applause. Please stand. Deb, would you stand? And I know there will be a need for town halls in the future, so we'll do this again as needed. Again, have a great evening, everyone. Drive home safely, and have a good night.